Why manipulation often feels productive, but it's actually destructive to your faith, your peace, and your purpose. So, what does it mean to manipulate your circumstances? Manipulating your circumstances means that you're trying to control the outcomes instead of trusting God. So, it's when we try to rush God's timing. Hand held high for that one. Force relationships, opportunities, or blessings. We take shortcuts instead of walking in obedience. And at the root of manipulation is control. So, why do we manipulate our circumstances? Let's talk about why we do this. And let's be honest, okay? Number one, we want control, right? Many of us struggle with the idea that God's ways are higher than ours. Preaching to the choir on that one for me. So when things don't happen the way that we want them to, we start thinking, God must not understand how badly I want this, or maybe God didn't hear me, or my personal favorite, you know what? Let me just help God out, right? Let me just help him out a little bit. And this mindset subtly puts us on the same level as God, and that's dangerous. Again, easier said than done, so I get it, okay? But I just want to bring this to your attention why we do these things. Number two, we are looking for a shortcut. Sometimes we manipulate our circumstances because we know that we're not ready. Maybe we're not spiritually prepared, we're operating in sin, we haven't developed the character required for the blessing that we seek. And and let me go back to that, the blessing that we seek, that we think may be a blessing, because sometimes what we think may be a blessing may be a burden. So I just want to clarify that. So instead of preparing, we try to position ourselves prematurely. And then last but not least, we are spiritually blind. And this one is a big one because when we manipulate our circumstances, we don't see the landmines that God is protecting us from, right? And so what looks like delay is often divine protection. And so let's talk about the consequences of manipulation, okay? Manipulating your circumstances always comes at a very high price that many of us really wouldn't have paid had we known better, right? So, number one, it demonstrates a lack of trust in God. So, even unintentionally, manipulation says, God, I don't trust you to handle this. Number two, it places you outside of God's will. And so you may get something, but not what God intended, right? Because anything gained outside of God's will is always going to come with a necessary struggle or baggage. And number three, it delays the blessing that God actually has in store for you. So while we're busy out there trying to force the wrong thing, we end up missing the right thing. And so let me talk about some examples in the Bible of, folks that manipulated their circumstances. So I think a classic one that we all know about is Abraham and Sarah manipulating God's promise, right? God promised Abraham a son, but when the promise seemed delayed, Sarah encouraged Abraham to have a child with her servant Hagar. And so the reason why they most likely, resulted to manipulating their circumstances is due to impatience. And they had a fear that God's timing wouldn't work. And they were trying to help God fulfill his promise. Now, let's take a look at the consequences that they experienced unnecessarily. They had long-term family conflict. That was a lot of drama, right? The division between Isaac and Ishmael's descendants. And then there was pain that extended generations, all due to them manipulating their circumstances. So the lessons that we can learn from Abraham and Sarah are that God's promises do not need human shortcuts. And then we have David, a man after God's own heart. He was manipulating consequences as well. He was manipulating his consequences, if you will. So after he sinned with Bathsheba, David attempted to cover it up by manipulating circumstances, which ultimately arranged Uriah's death, right? Which was Bathsheba's husband. So David manipulated his circumstances most likely due to fear of exposure. People were going to find out about what he did, and he had a desire to protect his reputation. And the consequences he had to endure were family turmoil. I mean, there was a lot of drama in David's family. And then, public rebuking for his decision. And there was ongoing household conflicts. And so the lesson that we can learn from David is that manipulation often compounds sin instead of concealing it. And then last but not least, we've got Ananias and Sapphira. That story has always been a crazy one to me. So they were manipulating their image, their spiritual image, how people viewed them. And they manipulated their circumstances because they lied about offering to appear more generous and spiritual than they actually were. And I believe a lot of the reasons why they were manipulating, what they actually offered, because they had a desire for status. They wanted people to view them as being, a lot more holier than what they were based off of their offering that they lied about, right? So, and they wanted to hold some back. And then another reason, due to their manipulation of their circumstances, could have been due to fear, looking less faithful, because they weren't honest with the amount that they were comfortable giving, I guess, right? So these are some of the reasons why I feel like they might have been manipulating their circumstances and why they lied about what their actual offering was. And so the consequences that Ananias and Sapphira had to endure were immediate. It was immediate judgment, and it was death. And so the lesson that we can learn from them is that God values integrity over appearances, right? He'd rather just have you be honest. And so the common thread that I've noticed in all of these stories, every act of manipulation stemmed from fear, impatience, pride, a desire to control, and every one of them, right, produced delayed blessings, broken relationships, and unnecessary suffering. And so you may be wondering, okay, Tasha, how do we stop manipulating our circumstances? And so here's the practical part. And a lot of what I'm getting ready to say is a lot easier said than done. Okay. Number one, choose faith over control. Again, choose faith over control, because faith allows you to declare God's promises without forcing outcomes. And if God promised it, you don't have to manipulate it. And like I said, that one is a lot easier said than done, because you start looking at your circumstances and you start getting impatient. And then what's the next thing you want to do? You want to help God out, right? So again, I want you to focus on choosing to have faith over control. And so number two, I want you to also think about shifting from selfishness to service. So manipulation is often self-focused. And I know my mom often, reminds me of this too. When I start to throw myself a pity party, it's because I'm focused on myself. There is always someone else out there that is in a worse position than you are. And if you focus on what it is that Christ wants and focus on helping other people, service has a way of redirecting your heart outward, right? And so when you serve others, your desire to control diminishes. And then we have, last but not least, I want you to practice gratitude. Gratitude reminds you that God has already been faithful. And, just a side note, something that I've been doing for several years, I don't know how many years I've been doing this, but I have like a little gratitude box. And so every day, regardless of how bad a day I've had, I make sure to write down 3 things that went right that day on a Post-it note. And sometimes getting up, I'm alive. Okay. I have my health, sometimes it could be things like that, right? Because some days are harder than others to think of something that you really feel grateful for. But we can always be grateful for the fact that, we woke up, we have our health, we have another day to get it right. So that may be something that a practice that you may want to adopt as well. So one thing I want you to remember is that you're not lacking You're learning. And a grateful heart is far less tempted to manipulate. If you're in a season of waiting right now, hear me out, okay? Delay is not denial. Waiting is not punishment, and obedience will always outlast shortcuts. I've seen that time and time again in my life. Manipulation often looks like it's you being wise. Manipulation may look like it's wisdom, but it's usually fear in disguise. So I want you to trust God enough to let him do it his way, even when it's uncomfortable. If this message encouraged you, be sure to subscribe to the channel and join my email community for more faith-based encouragement and devotionals. I'd love to stay connected. Remember, if you're everything to everyone, the risk being no one. You never know who you will inspire. See you next video.